will introduce you now, Bill. First, I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining the Zoom call and welcome. This is awesome. It's so exciting to do this. We were supposed to have this special speaker in the spring, way back in the day, but then COVID kind of sidelined all of our plans, so we weren't able to get Bill into our spot in town in Wingham. But I'm so excited. I'm thrilled to have him here tonight to speak to all of us. So let me introduce Bill Elliott and say thank you, Bill, for doing this. We are very, very thankful that you agreed to do it for us tonight, especially tonight, because right now we're all in lockdown. It's winter. We've been in lockdown for a while now. I mean, off and on. And so it's wonderful to be able to hear somebody's story and how somebody can change their mindset in order to move forward, right? And push through those challenges in life. So Bill is a Teeswater boy, for anybody who doesn't know, and I know him from teaching at FE Medill, where he was a student. I did not have the pleasure of teaching Bill, unfortunately, but I did teach his sister and his brother. And I didn't know what Bill was going through physically, and consequently, emotionally. Bill was born with a rare genetic condition and has had lifelong health problems because of that. They've led to 2 open heart surgeries by the age of 34. Are you, Bill?
That's
By the age. Yeah. So it's forced Bill to really test the limits of what his body can do and what his mind can do as well. And I just read this actually on the Maven Project site that Bill can deadlift 545 pounds. Is this correct?
Used to, yeah.
That is damn impressive, let me tell you. Bill started speaking in July of 2019, and he speaks about the impact that attitude and mentality have on our lives, learning to find strength from challenges, and also showing others to do the same while telling his story. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce Bill, or Muscle Bill Elliott. Yay!
Yeah, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your evenings to join in and check this out. I think I get about as much out of this speaking stuff as the people that listen. So it's pretty special every time that I get the opportunity to do it. Thank you, Shannon, and Mental Health Matters for inviting me to be part of your speaking series. I thank you for having the trust in me with your audience too. I'm not a professional speaker by any means, so it's nice that you can trust me to do my thing. But as many as you know, my name is William Elliott, Muscle Bill, whatever. And just like to suggest, take all this with a grain of sand. I'm not formally educated or anything. I'm not a mental health expert. This is all based off of my life experiences, and basically it's mostly stuff I've used to help me communicate with others and relate to other people better. So I've had the opportunity to be exposed to some aspects of life that many people don't get to experience. And I believe it's those things that have allowed me to learn about my body and my mind and gain confidence in my ability to keep going. So my plan for tonight is kind of share with you some of my life story, some of my medical stuff, and kind of use that as context as to where some of the imagery or the concepts I mentioned, where they come from. So pretty much everything stems from a health context for me, but I feel generally they can be applied to most aspects of life. So it's my hope that most of you watching can take away some kind of positive message from tonight. So with that said, this first little bit, there's a bit of medical terminology, and you don't have to worry about remembering it. It's just part of my life and part of my story, so I'm going to share some. So like I said, thank you for coming out, and here we go. So when I was 17 months old, diagnosed with a rare genetic condition called homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. And basically what that means is my body isn't able to process cholesterol. So my parents were told I need to have a heart and liver transplant likely, and that I'd probably live to be somewhere between 3 and 9 years old. So At that time, there was one form of treatment available called plasmapheresis. And basically what that is, it's a treatment similar to dialysis, where a machine basically takes the blood from the body and separates the blood and the plasma, and then gives the blood back and throws the plasma out, because that's where the cholesterol is circulated, right? So in order to receive plasmapheresis, I had to receive a central line. It's a way to get the blood out of the body. So basically what a central line is, it's a plastic tube that's inserted under the skin of the chest, runs up into the neck, into the jugular, and then down into the SVC, into the superior vena cava. So 17 months old, my parents found out I have this condition. Find out I'm not likely going to live be longer than about 9 years old. But they decided to give this treatment a try. So I got my first central line, went for plasmapheresis, sick kids in Toronto, and life went on. So once every 2 weeks, Dad and I went down to sick kids. I got my treatment, and over the next bunch of years, I had a lot of problems with central lines, blood clots and infections at the exit site on my chest. So I ended up having probably around a dozen central lines over the years, and that kind of took me to the spring I was turning 8. I went for my regular stress test, and they found that the right side of my heart was 90% blocked, and the left side of my heart was about 78% blocked. So on May 31st, 1994, it was the day after my 8th birthday, I became the youngest kid in North America to have a triple bypass surgery. So I was in Sick Kids Hospital for 7 days, recovered over the summer, and went back to school in the fall. Then as luck would have it, the next summer, I was 9, I got whooping cough. So that landed me down in Sick Kids again for 5 weeks. And during that time, I was diagnosed with another condition called superior vena cava syndrome. Basically, what had happened was due to all the central lines over the years, my superior vena cava had scarred shut. And this is a bit of a problem because the superior vena cava is basically what allows blood to flow down from your head. So oftentimes patients with superior vena cava syndrome have symptoms ranging from blurred vision to headache and sometimes brain hemorrhaging and stroke. So when I was in the hospital with whooping cough, they said, well, we can put a stent through that blockage to hopefully get the blood flowing again. So you can imagine it's kind of like I had some plasticine and you jam a straw through the middle, and that kind of provides a place for the blood to go. So anyway, I went in for surgery, and they found that the blockage was too tall in my SVC, and they weren't going to be able to put a stent through it. So basically, when I woke up, they said, surgery was unsuccessful, and there's nothing we can do, so good luck. So fortunately for me, my body was able to adapt over the next bunch of years, and I grew new veins in my chest and in my neck. They're venous collaterals, they're called. And sort of on a sideburn of things, with superior vena cava syndrome, I wasn't going to be able to receive any more central lines. And if I didn't have a central line, I wasn't going to be able to go for plasmapheresis. Without plasmapheresis, I was going to die. So unfortunately, my line hung in there for a lot more years than it was expected to. I hit high school, started exercising, and I lost a bunch of weight, and kind of found this whole thing called working out. But when I turned about, I think I was 16 when I switched from Sick Kids to London Health Science Center. And when I switched hospitals, I got a new team of doctors, and they introduced to me these things called AV fistulas. So basically what an AV fistula is, it's a surgical procedure where they attach a vein to an artery, and due to the opposing blood flow, the artery blows the vein up, which then in turn provides needle access for my treatment instead of the central line. So over my high school years, I had 3 fistula surgeries. The first 2 were unsuccessful, but after my 3rd fistula surgery, I sat down with the surgeon, and he said, as long as you have this thing in your arm, you're not going to be able to lift more than 50 pounds. So, I said, I can understand what you're telling me, and I appreciate that, but as my doctor, you need to know I'm probably not going to listen to that. So needless to say, that fall when I went to college, I joined the gym and started lifting 5 days a week, and I never went back. So fortunately, my health stayed stable for most of my 20s, and I had a few complications in my fistula over the years, but my health was pretty good. I was working and lifting, and this whole kind of theme of get ripped or die trying kind of came about, and took over pretty much everything for a while. But a few years into that, found this thing called powerlifting, and I had to give it a try. So over my late 20s, I competed in powerlifting 3 times, the last of which was in June of 2016, and it happened to be on Father's Day. So my dad came down to watch in the video, and at that meet there was probably 50 or 60 people maybe competing, and I was one of them. It's a funny thing with chronic illness. Oftentimes, you and your identity, you get associated with illness, and it becomes kind of part of how people identify you. It's kind of like, oh, you're that dude with the heart problems, right? Like you've got the health stuff, and that's true. But that's one of the beautiful things about powerlifting for me is, that day I wasn't just this guy with the heart problems who came around to lift some weights and get the sympathy cheer of like, good job, man. Like, thanks for trying. I was considered a peer, and I got to share the platform with my coach at the time, Paul O'Need. Shout out, Paul. But at that meet, I hit all my lifting goals. I squatted 405 pounds. I benched 315 pounds. And as Shannon said, I deadlifted 545 pounds. And as I was standing there, on my third attempt deadlift, I wasn't just standing there as a 30-year-old man lifting weights in some tights, but I was that 19-year-old kid who just got told as long as he had this thing in his arm, he's not going to be able to lift more than 50 pounds. And I was an 8-year-old boy who just became the youngest kid in North America to have a triple bypass surgery. And probably most impactful for me, I was a 17-month-old baby whose parents just got told that their son wasn't going to live to see the double digits. So, when I stood there with the 545 pounds in my hand, it was the biggest fuck yeah moment of my life. Absolutely. And I can't really describe how that felt, but it brings me to my concept of fuck yeah moments. So it seems as though, many of us, we don't allow ourselves to fully experience these fuck yeah moments that we have. It seems as though, whether it's a conscious choice or not, we minimize our experiences, both what we would say would be good and bad experiences. It leads me to wonder, like, why do we do this? Why don't we allow ourselves to fully acknowledge our accomplishments? And also, why do we minimize the bad things or what we would consider to be like a negative situation? Like if one of our friends or someone we love, if they're succeeding and doing well, we don't hesitate to tell them, right? We reach out, we support and encourage them. And similarly, if someone we know, they tell us they're struggling, we're the first person to, tell them that they're doing great. We'll remind them of patience and understanding for themselves. But for some reason with ourselves, or at least for me, if we're doing something great, someone commends us and says, oh, hey man, you're killing it. Like, what are the chances a response is something like, yeah, it's cool. It's no big deal. Or if we're faced with a hurdle or a setback, like, how often have you said, like, oh, it's okay, don't worry. Like, I'll be fine. And like, I agree, it will be fine. But it doesn't mean you have to be fine right now. And I believe that acknowledging our efforts when the lows are low, it's also what allows us to build the confidence in ourselves and our abilities to keep going and get through the hard shit, and gain momentum in our ability to succeed. I've been asked so many times, like, I don't know how you keep dealing with all this shit. And largely, I think it's just because I've had practice. So for myself, I find I'm very used to navigating those lowest lows. And the hard part for me is realizing, like, what are the little things that we would celebrate? Like, what do those even look like? how often do you go about your day and don't even think twice about like what else could be worth a little extra credit? Or maybe what took a little bit more energy or effort today than we realized? There's something simple like if I'm sitting having my coffee and I can have a few minutes to just be, that's another version of a fuck yeah moment too, right? It's obviously on a spectrum of intensity there. It's not quite the same as deadlifting 545 pounds, but I feel like those small wins or intentional positive reoccurring moments that we can choose to create, I think that they accumulate over time. And at least for me, I'm hoping that one of those things where better practice makes better type of situations. And I'm hoping I'll gain, competency with an increased exposure to them. But going into that powerlifting meet, I planned for it to be my last one. And I knew powerlifting wasn't likely a good idea for me in terms of longevity. So I shifted my focus and I hired a bodybuilding coach. That was my buddy Juan. Shout out. And I got in the most aesthetic condition of my life, which was another pretty major fuck yeah moment for me. At that time I was working 2 jobs, 7 days a week. I was going through divorce, probably sleeping 3 or 4 hours a night. And despite all that, probably because of all that, really, but it was the most dedicated time of my life, and I'm very proud of that. It was around that same time I realized that I wasn't really happy with where I was in life, so I started making some changes. I switched jobs, moved to Kingston. I started taking some time to appreciate being outside. The water and the sunset around Kingston area is absolutely beautiful. And then one day, I got off work, pulled my car into the Good Life parking lot, and when I stood up to go into the gym, the world went black. So fortunately for me, I didn't go all the way out, and I was able to go in and do my workout. But the next day, I called my doctor and I said, "Hey man, like last night something fucked up happened and something's wrong." And that little incident landed me down in London Hospital for 2 weeks. They ran a bunch of tests. Friday I was being discharged. The heart surgeon came in. He said, "Mr. Elliott, you're at severe risk of instant death." And basically what they found, my aortic valve was severely stenosed. And what that means, basically, the aortic valve is kind of like the exit door to your heart. So all the blood that pumps through your heart leaves through the aortic valve. And basically my exit door was almost completely closed. So if you imagine your aortic valve, it's about the size of a quarter. And mine at the time was more like the size of a pea. So because of that, the pressure gradient going across that valve was up to 20 times normal. And because of that, at some point, literally anytime my heart beat, my heart was going to just blow apart and drop dead, right? So I said, okay, well, what can we do about this? And basically said I've got 2 options. The first one was leave things as they are, untreated, and basically just go about life until my aortic valve blows off. And the second option was to go for surgery. So that obviously sounds like a pretty no-brainer decision, which it was, but things weren't that simple, unfortunately. So remember I said when I was 9, I was diagnosed with severe vena cava syndrome, and my body was able to grow these extra veins in my chest and in my neck. And basically, that's what had kept me alive all this time. But in order to go for open heart surgery, you need to cut the chest and destroy those veins. So in order to access the heart, you got to split the chest, crack the sternum, and gain access to everything in there. So unfortunately, that kind of led to 2 highly likely, not so good outcomes for me. The first of which involves severe bleeding because of the amount and the size of the veins in my chest. Just had an increased risk of bleeding. But then also, there was a relatively high chance that as soon as they cut my chest open, I wouldn't have a way for blood to get out of my head, and I would just have a brain hemorrhage or stroke and die. So Anyway, he said in his professional opinion, if we didn't get me in for surgery in the next 8 to 12 weeks, I likely wouldn't survive long enough to even get to surgery. So that day I left the hospital and I didn't hear from him for 7 months. Like nothing.
What?
So as you can imagine, my life at that time pretty much fell apart. I started going to counseling, had an anxiety attack, began the process of another separation. But almost every day it became more apparent just how bad things were getting, and they were definitely getting worse. But May 25th, 2018, it was a Friday morning. I went in for heart surgery, and as some of you may remember, 20 hours later, I came out. So during that time, my right lung collapsed. I received 67 units of blood product. And because of all that foreign blood product, my kidneys had all but shut down. And because of that, I gained 50 pounds of fluid literally overnight. But I woke up. And when I woke up, I found that both my arms were so swollen, all the nerve endings in both my arms were compressed and they were completely numb. So I was in kind of rough shape, but it's interesting. You know, my mom pointed out at the time, in 1994, I was admitted on my 8th birthday for my first open heart surgery. And then there I was 24 years later on my 32nd birthday for another open heart surgery. And sort of just to kind of put that into a story, the first thing I remember was Monday night, and I had a clock on the wall at the foot of my bed. And when I looked at the clock, I could see the numbers, I could see the hands, but I had no idea what time it was. So I thought, you know, it's either the drugs or maybe I've got brain damage. You know, I was out for a long time. But you know me, I'm always running late. And I wasn't really too worried about this telling time thing. But the next night, Tuesday going into Wednesday, I woke up, I looked at the clock, and it was 1:15 in the morning. And I thought, holy shit, you know, maybe I don't have brain damage. But I realized I had a high fever. So I called my nurse and she came down and she said, I can't give you anything because it wasn't due for my Tylenol for another couple of hours. But she said she could give me a cold cloth and a cold drink. So I said, yeah, you know, that sounds amazing. She goes and comes back, and I asked her if she could help me get out of my bed and sit me in a chair. So I was all gross and sweaty, you know, laying in the bed. So she got me up, poured me a drink, and just told me, you know, let me know when you want to get into bed, and I'll come back and help you. So she left, and I threw my gown down onto the floor. And so here I am, sitting there with this cold cloth on my head, buck naked in this chair, had tubes and wires everywhere. And when I went to reach for my drink, I kind of remember that I couldn't use my arms, I couldn't feel my hands, right? So I kind of struggled to get that drink to my face. So I kind of just squeezed my cup and, like, you know, got the straw to my face eventually. And when that ice cold apple juice and ginger ale hit my mouth, it changed my fucking life. And you know, I can't put into words how impactful that moment was for me. And I sat back in my chair and I started laughing. And my roommate at the time, he's an older gentleman. He heard me laughing. He said, "Hey man, like, is everything okay over there?" And I said, "Man, I'm doing fucking great." Yeah. And he was like, "Oh, you know, okay, well, what's so funny?" And I said, "Well, today's my birthday and I'm 32 and I made it." He was like, "Happy birthday. You know, it's great to have you." I said, "Man, it is so fucking good to be here." And that was really the first time in my life I kind of realized that I don't think maybe like a lot of other people do. You know, I was sitting in this chair, my arms were numb, couldn't breathe, had nerve pain shooting through my whole body from this piece of tissue on my tailbone that was rotted through. You know, I'm sitting here naked in a chair, drinking this cold thing and just thinking, man, life is so fucking good. But anyway, I was in the hospital for 2 weeks and I got released. As you can probably imagine, I was still in pretty rough shape. My instructions were to walk as far as I can, as many times as I can every day. And if I didn't intentionally work on inflating my right lung again, I wouldn't be breathing on my own for very long. So every day, that's what I did. My dad came down, he'd help me outside, he'd get my walker down the stairs for me, and we'd go for walks. So probably the first couple of days, it was like 10, maybe 15 feet, take a break, and I'd walk home and take a nap. But every night my body was basically going into shock. You know, I'd sit in my recliner chair in the dark, in the silence, and I just coughing, shaking, and nerve pain shooting through my whole body. And I just sat there, just kind of accepting that this is where I'm at, and this is real life. You know, my body can take all this pain, and I keep waking up in the morning. It's a funny thing. People check in on you, and they ask you about my situation and how things went, how I'm feeling, and how I'm healing. And all these really caring and sincere things, they also seem to largely have the same reactions. There's this almost an overwhelming response of, I don't know how you do it. That's so crazy, and like it's so overwhelming. There's so much to go through. Like I would have died. And all these things are meant to be kind of encouraging and said in this kind of all like inspiring context, but all the while, for one thing, it's like, yeah, I know how crazy it is. I'm living it every fucking day. Like, I'm very aware of how intense this whole situation is. But it got me thinking, like, why is everyone so scared for me? That seemed like an instinctual reaction from so many people was fear. Like, I don't know how you do it. I would have died. And I found it so interesting. Why do people doubt their resiliency? And why don't I doubt mine? So I sat in my chair and I just kind of thought about these things. And I came up with this concept of an hourglass. So what I want you to do is imagine an hourglass. Imagine the sand falling slowly, one grain at a time. Now imagine yourself as one of those grains of sand in that hourglass. Where are you? I'm going to take a guess and say you're probably somewhere up near that top. Now, most of us, we imagine that we have this concept of time, live this thing that we call life. And in our minds, all this sand will fall beneath us before ours does. And then when it's our time, ours will fall too. And I realized that when I imagine myself in that hourglass, I imagine myself right down here near the bottom, always close to falling. And I think that's because for essentially my whole life, I'm very much aware of how fleeting life is and how little time I apparently had. So I'm not scared living down here with very little sand beneath me. And I realized that when people hear about my life and my situation, they instantly imagine themselves going from up here near the top to right down here near the bottom. And it's like, well, no wonder you feel so anxious all the time. Like that difference, terrifying. No wonder people imagine my life as this, almost unbearable feat of perseverance. No wonder you feel anxious and are scared for me, right? So it just kind of made me understand where that response came from. But people ask, how do you do it all the time? And in this context, for me, I just don't look down. Ultimately, none of us know how much time we have, and none of us know what tomorrow has in store for us, let alone today. So what difference does it make how much sand we have? Right? So I want you to imagine another hourglass, and I want you to picture yourself somewhere in that hourglass. Except this time, fuck the sand. Life isn't about sand. Life isn't about time. Life is our journey between this hourglass into the horizon. We don't know how much time we have. We don't know where we're going to end up. But little by little, we find out as we move in the direction of the horizon. We can stand there scared looking at our feet, counting the grains of sand as they fall beneath us, or just take a step. No, sand's going to fall either way. Now, as that summer went on and the little speed bumps, my recovery kind of continued, started to feel better, and I was able to get back to the gym. Basically, getting back on my feet, trying to find out what life was going to look like at that time. I started on the prescriptive hypertrophy program. Thanks, Jordan. And life started to have kind of a semblance of normalcy again. Till one day, it was in June 2019, my mom's birthday of all days. Woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning with a fever, and 12 hours later, I was convulsing in the back of an ambulance on the way to London Hospital. It was a really odd experience. I was shaking and kind of slamming on the stretcher in the ambulance, but I was still having a conversation with the attendants the whole time. And at that point, it was the first time in my life that I didn't think I was going to make it. I knew my heart rate was exceptionally high, and I was experiencing jaw pain, neck pain in my back, in my chest. My left arm went numb, and being relatively familiar with the symptoms of a heart attack, I remember I asked the attendant to grab a pen and a paper because I wanted to write a note to my mom. And she said no, everything's going to be fine. But I figured it was only a matter of time until, with all the work I've had done on my heart over the years, my body just couldn't take anymore. So, like I said, it was a hell of an experience, and I don't remember being scared. It was kind of like a out-of-body experience almost. Like, on one hand, my body was going apeshit. It was intense. But on the other hand, I was fully aware of everything going on around me. Like, I could hear the driver's conversation with the hospital, the instructions on the drugs they were going to give me. And anyway, when I got down to London Hospital, they didn't have room for me. So luckily I passed out. But when I woke up a couple hours later, I was in a room and my parents were there. Two of my best friends were there. And the surgeon came in and she said, well, based on my condition, it seemed like I had flesh-eating disease. And we need to go in for surgery immediately, right? So she said they're going to cut into the skin of my pec, assess the condition of the tissue, and if it looked as they expected it to, they were going to remove any of the affected tissue, because with flesh-eating disease, that's all you can do. So she said if the tissue in my shoulder into my arm was affected, they're going to take off my arm, and whatever's left when they were done, that's the way it is. So I said, oh, that makes sense, and signed the paper, went in for surgery within about 15 minutes. So luckily I didn't have flesh-eating disease, and obviously I've still got both my arms, so that's a bonus. But over those next 2 weeks in the ICU, I experienced, hands down, the most traumatic shit of my life, my adult life anyway. And when I got released and went home, the first time in my life, I felt completely broken. I felt isolated and alone. In my entire life, I've had the best, most supportive group of people around me. My family has always supported me, and I've had unbelievable friends and basically this whole community of people around me. And I know those aren't things everybody gets to experience. Yet regardless of that, here I was feeling completely isolated and alone. And I don't know if it was PTSD or something, but anyway, I wasn't sleeping very much. And when I was laying down to try and take a nap, I'd be paralyzed. And it's really, really intense kind of things. But in hindsight, it was a lot like the convulsions in the ambulance, really. Like I knew I was at home. I knew I was awake, laying in my bed, but I couldn't move and I couldn't make any noise. And I just kind of had to let it run the course. But anyway, eventually I got in for EMDR treatment, and I know it doesn't work for everybody, but just one session, it really made a difference for me, and all that kind of paralysis stuff stopped. But once again, I found myself kind of having very familiar conversations. It's very similar to the year before. People here like, man, I don't know how you can survive all this crazy stuff. Like, don't you ever want to give up? Don't you ever wonder why me? And for as long as I can remember, I've been extremely grateful that it's been me experiencing all these things. That it's me in the hospital and that it's my body that's getting cut up and scarred. I'm very thankful that it's me experiencing these things and not someone else that I love. And I don't know like the trauma science on stuff, but I have a memory of being like maybe 7, 8, 9, kind of in there. Those are busy years for me, but I have a memory of being on this hospital bed in the hallway waiting to go into the OR. And both my parents were there to hug me goodbye. And I remember my mom was crying. And I told her not to worry because I was going to be okay. And it's burned into my brain, this feeling of being so happy that it was me going in there and not my brother and my sister. And don't get me wrong, like I'm very sure I was terrified, and that's probably why it's burned into my brain. But to answer that question, don't ever wonder why me. Like, it was never a thought that even occurred to me that someone in my position might have until other people started asking me like how often I was thinking it. So once again, I started to wonder like, why does it seem like most people doubt their resiliency? And why don't I doubt mine? No, it's so strange, this almost instinctual certainty other people seem to have that they wouldn't survive something that they don't really know that much about. And I started to wonder like, where does that come from? And then also like, why isn't that something that's really crossed my mind? And these questions led me to kind of another concept I have where I base it on always indoors. So I feel like more times than not, when major events happen, it's not generally the major event that's the most impactful thing. It's all the surrounding events that are seemingly kind of smaller that happen before or after. And those seem to be kind of the real test of things. So let's say if I was going to imagine myself in someone else's situation or experiencing something that they are, typically it seems like we would imagine that experience in isolation. And even just doing that isn't easy, right? Like, well, let's say in the example of my ICU stay for 2 weeks, like this infection, I wake up one day and it's like, holy shit, convulsing in the ambulance, going into surgery, potentially losing my arm, all this craziness. It's like, yeah, I couldn't deal with all that. However, like if that was it, if that's a 2-week event that comes and goes, life goes on, right? And in reality, like that's where the trauma happens for sure. But people would never guess that during that time, and not to say I wasn't frustrated, because I definitely was. The residents weren't listening, and they were making things worse than I thought they had to be. But on the other hand of things, like every morning I was enjoying the sunshine as it came in my window, and I was peeing in a bottle, looking out at the sunshine in the parking lot, like watching the wind blow in the trees, and there's that whole aftermath situation of the PTSD and counseling and the whole thing. But that main 2 weeks, like if that was all it was, I think it would be way easier, right? So I think the best way I can explain it to compare it to a room. So if our lives are this ongoing hallway, and each experience that we have adds a new room to our hallway. Once we're in these rooms, we've acquired the ability to assess new information and gain new perspective on things that we would otherwise have no idea about. Right? We cannot imagine what it's like to be in a room that we've never been in. So how is anyone ever supposed to, know what the color of the walls are or what kind of furniture's in there? First of all, they've never been in that room, but that room's not in their hallway, right? It's in yours or in mine. So getting frustrated about how seemingly, clueless or sometimes insensitive other people's responses are, it doesn't make any sense. Causes tension. It wastes a lot of energy, or it did for me anyway. And realizing that we don't have the range to even begin to imagine what other people's rooms are like because we haven't lived their life. We haven't been in their hallway. So someone says, like, I just found out I need to have a triple bypass surgery. To me, in my mind, I'm like, well, that's pretty standard stuff. It's not that big a deal. They do them every day. And my mind goes to a place of excitement. It's kind of like you're about to experience some life-changing things, but you'll also gain some new perspectives and learn a lot about yourself. But in reality, not everybody goes for triple bypass for their 8th birthday. So chances are that's probably not what that person is thinking right now. So likely a better response for me would be something like, how are you doing with that information? Or do you have any questions? Or I think this is a huge blind spot for people. Do you even want to talk about it at all? Because at least in my experience, almost everything that happens in that kind of major sense, almost every person I see, it's like, man, isn't this so intense? Aren't you scared? Like, aren't you scared you're gonna die? Or how are you even gonna deal with all this shit? And it's like, okay, thanks for reminding me. It's not like it's on my mind 24/7 already, right? Let's talk about how my circumstances are stressing you out so that you can feel better. But all that to say, sometimes a distraction would be nice. So to relate that kind of back to the hallways and door stuff, I don't need to know what it might be like in your room because I'll never be in it. And that's okay. But if I can accept what it's like for you, maybe at some point I've encountered something that I would perceive to be similar. And then maybe we can communicate to a point where we can both relate to one another. And maybe we won't feel so alone in our experiences. So to me, it makes more sense to ask something like, what's the door frame like? Or definitely one of my favorites, maybe we just get the hell out of here, go for a walk. And it kind of brings me to another concept I've been working on with helping, being helped, and helplessness, and related to sitting in the rain. As I said earlier, most of the stuff I think about is surrounding the context of health, or specifically my own health, and my perceptions of the interactions I have with others, and how others seem to interpret my life experiences. I don't know if that makes any sense, but anyway, for me, it is always going to be raining in my life. And just to hear that, it probably sounds like a negative statement, or there's some kind of sad implications. But let's just say that's the case. If it is always going to be raining, oftentimes it can be so draining to try and navigate other people's feelings when I decline their umbrella. What good does it do me to sit under an umbrella all the time, to protect me from all the rain? Like, what's the goal? Be sheltered from the elements and be thankful that my umbrella works? Or maybe be thankful that someone else came to bring me the umbrella so we can both stay dry. And don't get me wrong, like, oftentimes it can absolutely be a welcomed reprieve. But for me, if it's gonna be raining in my life, I'd rather live in the rain. Get out there, get wet, get comfortable, understand and accept it is raining, and learn to appreciate that reality. Find joy in how that rain smells, right? How it feels landing on my head. And company can be an amazing thing, but with that said, it seems like a key component to company that oftentimes we as people forget. Being company comes with responsibility. We shouldn't take offense to someone not wanting our help. And even if you don't understand why I want to sit in the rain, I hope that you can accept that it's my choice to do so. So oftentimes I think we impose our thoughts and our wants and our perceptions on others, and myself included, but we don't take the time to consider what it is that they want. They're the ones in a vulnerable state. If we want to help them, do we want to help them because they actually want help? Or do we want to help them because someone that we love seems to be struggling? And because of that, now we feel helpless. Now we feel uncomfortable. And now we feel like we want to feel better, right? But I think accepting that feeling of helplessness when somebody doesn't want or isn't ready for our help, I think processing it for and with ourselves is a skill. And that's a skill that we can't hone unless or until we find ourselves in a situation where we get the opportunity to hone it. And I'm not saying, stop offering to help. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is if we better manage our own expectations when we do offer to help, if that person does not want our help or is not ready to accept help, that's okay. We can still offer to support them in whatever ways we have the capacity to do so, if and when they're ready and willing to accept it. Our feelings of helplessness are not their responsibility at that time, and we can choose to sit under our own umbrella, even if they don't want to. There should be no guilt in that. And inversely, just because I don't want to sit under your umbrella doesn't mean I'm not willing to offer you mine. I believe there can be so much value in accepting that some things we cannot change. And fortunately, most things in most people's lives, in most situations, that's not the case. But I think it's important to be aware that although change is guaranteed in life, some shit will never change. So as cliche as it might be to say, I think an adage like this, as with most things, can be a tool that can be used whenever it may serve you best. Not as a scapegoat, but Band-Aids were invented for a reason. They don't replace your skin, but they offer you a little protection when you're vulnerable. When I started out, I mentioned it was my hope that everyone, walks away with some helpful little nugget of some kind. So just to kind of wrap up, some things that have been useful for me over the last few years, I think that it's important that we celebrate our wins, because generally we make damn sure to acknowledge our shortcomings. It's so easy to feel weighed down by life and how hard we may be struggling at any given time. And I think if we don't celebrate how great we are, particularly when we do something we're proud of or excited about, I think we sell ourselves short and deny ourselves the opportunity to gain potential momentum. So acknowledge those fuck yeah moments and stop looking at your feet. So often we find ourselves feeling overwhelmed, or for me, there's this whole paralysis by analysis situation, and it's not an easy thing to navigate. But one thing I find that really seems to help, just remembering not to look down. We have no idea how much sand is left, or when our grain will fall. But in reality, we're going to be fearful and scared regardless. So just take a step. The sand's going to fall either way. And one thing I found to help me, like I said, I've had a lot of conversations with people over, my experiences and theirs. And I think something that's commonly overlooked, this idea that it's okay not to understand what someone else's life or circumstances are like. It's not ours to experience. But being able to accept that we don't or we can't understand I think it's a huge tool in our awareness toolbox. And speaking for myself, being scared for somebody else's future is such a fucking waste of time and energy. Because like for me, in my example, like I know that my health is going to be a shit show again at some point, if not at many points. And I'm very sure that I'm going to get through, whatever comes. And when it's all said and done, I'll have had the opportunity to add a new room to my hallway. I'll find out what color the walls are when I get there. And I think if you're frustrated or scared, there can absolutely be utility in popping that umbrella up from time to time. With that being said, getting used to and learning to legitimately enjoy the rain while it's falling, I think that's a really powerful thing. It's okay if you want an umbrella. It's okay if you don't. I think the important thing is if somebody wants or needs some company, show up. There can be so much beauty in the world if we're open to seeing it. And I think most people would agree there is nothing that compares to the smell of a little downpour. Anyway, once again, I want to thank Mental Health Matters for asking me to do this and allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. If anybody has any questions, comments, whatever, you can shoot me a message on Muscle Bill if tonight or tomorrow, anytime. I'd love to hear some feedback of any kind. And put on my card. If anybody wants a card, I don't know, whatever you see, send me your address, shoot me a message. I'll get one in the mail. I'm waiting on another set of cards to come in so I can make some more. But when they get here, I can send them out to anybody that wants one. So I appreciate your attention and I'm grateful for your patience. And I thank you for your time.